Welcome to today's episode of InfoSec Journeys. Ashley and I are really pleased today to be joined by James Morris, someone who works in the InfoSec recruitment space. And we've got a lot to cover with you today, James, about how you broke into the recruitment space, what it's like to work in that competitive field, and then also what it's like for businesses to recruit in information security, skill shortages, and also as a candidate, how you can best succeed in this environment. So before we get into all of that really good stuff, why don't I throw it over to you, James? Give us a brief introduction, who you are and what you're all about.
Thanks, Colin, and Ashley, and I'm really pleased to be here. So thanks for having me on. So I guess, I'm James. I've been in cybersecurity recruitment now for the last 7 years, just over now. So always been with the same company, a company called InfoSec. We've sort of grown and chopped and changed as the times have gone on. Started out with just me and a director in a sort of an industrial park. There was a converted farm at the time, so it was literally a converted cowshed, and we've sort of grown out of there now and moved offices a bit. So it was a really quirky beginning, actually, and a hell of a sort of an insight into recruitment. My boss has been doing it for sort of 20, 30 years or so. So it was a real sort of journey to sort of learn how things have been done the right way before LinkedIn, before, really email was up and running and sort of the old school way. So we've sort of learned and grown and sort of specialized in the InfoSec field a bit further and develop niches in there, which is pretty cool and allows us to add value better to our clients but also work a little bit easier, I guess. So now we're based just outside of London, Tunbridge Wells way, and we've got 7 people now, looking to bring on. We've got another person starting soon, and recruiting further from there. So yeah, we're on the up, slowly but surely. But yeah, no, it's going well. It's going well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like pre-link, I'm trying to imagine the days pre-LinkedIn of all of these notifications and stuff like that. So so what was that like then? The state of recruitment when you first joined it. What was the kind of appeal for you?
Oh, you know what, if you speak to a lot of recruiters, they'll be in the same shoes. They weren't really sure what recruitment was before they got involved in it. So I came out of uni, sports science, and I think I initially wanted to go in the police. So I applied for the police, got rejected. I can't remember the exact reason why. And I thought, crikey, what am I going to do now? So I was looking at these jobs online suitable for graduates. And I thought, okay, I don't really want to do sport as a career. It's great, but it's not really a career for me. And all I kept seeing was recruitment. So I just started applying. You interview and then you slowly learn about what recruitment is and how it is and things like that. And I'm lucky enough to sort of go and meet Nick who was down the road from me at the time. A lot of the places were in London and the big city lights, attraction type stuff like that. And then you get in and you sort of learn that it's not just sort of marrying sort of job applications with job adverts and things like that. There's a lot more to it than that. And it was such an eye-opening journey between spinning plates, between attracting candidates and filling requisitions for clients, setting expectations, and all these different elements in between that the big adverts of Ibiza trips and on-target earnings of 100K don't really tell you. But no, it's been such a fantastic journey. Like I said, I touched on it earlier, the technology now has come on leaps and bounds to what it was. Even in the last 5 to 10 years, LinkedIn has completely changed database systems, the way we talk to people, the way we attract people. It's a lot more saturated than it was as well. I think, 7 years ago, there was certainly less competition, I feel anyway, from other recruitment partners and certainly from sort of cybersecurity recruitment. So the way we got into it was my boss Nick did a lot of sort of general tech stuff. I had the opportunity to work on a couple of, it was like a CISO type role, a couple of security analyst type roles as my first roles in the industry. And then from there, I sort of enjoyed that space and got to know a few people. So I sort of spiraled down that way, but sort of went down that avenue a bit further, which was where this has all come from, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot more cybersecurity specialist recruiters springing up. You think, oh, hang on, we were doing this. There was only a handful of us. Now there's everyone doing it. So it's certainly changed. It's a lot more competitive than it was.
I'd like to pedal back a little bit because I don't think some people actually fully understand what a recruitment agency does. So I probably don't actually fully understand what you do as from a recruitment perspective. So are you able to just, go into a little bit of detail of what a recruitment agency does for a client or for a, prospective employee of that client?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So so I guess what you have is the end client, whether it's TalkTalk, for example. TalkTalk will have requirements for a number of jobs that are either people leaving and we're replacing them as a sort of backfill, or they're new hires and building out new teams. And a lot of that can be done through direct or internal advertising. But I guess where we come in and our agency specializes is finding those niche cybersecurity roles that maybe require a bit of sort of proactive searching or headhunting. So what we'll do is we'll work with TalkTalk, for example. We don't, but just say an example, we'll go out and then we'll find that particular skill set. So that might be a combination of advertising the job, headhunting, using our network and things. So say if whoever is looking for a SOC analyst, for example, we'll go out and proactively find that skill set to be able to complement the advert responses that you may get as well. So it's very sort of proactive, and it's not just sort of advertising and waiting for everything to come in, because you guys can do that.
I guess there's quite a lot of before you get to that stage. I dare say that you really have to understand what that business is looking for in that particular role. If you're recruiting for a CISO, or if you're recruiting for a SOC analyst or what have you, like understanding why that company is in that position and what they're trying to achieve and what, you know, strategic goals they have for developing in that area. How do you kind of learn about, I mean, you said yourself there, coming out of uni, sports science kind of backgrounds, how do you learn about InfoSec and what's important for a business when you're not in an InfoSec environment yourself? You know what I mean? How did that look like?
Yeah. That was one of the key learning curves I learned really, really early on. And it's one of these where you don't need to sort of be able to do the role yourself, but you need to understand the inner workings or the motivations of. And a lot of that, to be honest, came from speaking to people. So when we would work a new role, for instance, I would go out of my way enormously to understand the requirements for what the hiring manager was looking for. And then that made it easier to translate to sort of the candidate market. You know, is this role really for you or is it not? So if this role is offering progression and training and development, and in 2 years' time you could be sort of managing a small team, there's growth there, that's fantastic. Or vice versa, if it's not and it's sort of more keeping the lights on, that's also fine. But it's important to know what the role entails before going to market with this, so you get the right person. In terms of learning about it, I still get a bit of ribbon for this in the office. I went a bit OTT, I'd say, maybe to start with. So I went and bought a CISSP for Dummies book. I started training for the CISSP. I started listening to all these podcasts and everything, to the point where I was taking my focus off the actual recruitment and trying to learn so much about security. And I think this lasted, no joke, around sort of 2 weeks. And I was thinking, I can't balance all these things.
Yep.
So I think you don't need to sort of be past certifications per se. I know some recruiters do, but I think it's more about having an appreciation of podcasts and information like yourselves. There's the Cyberwire. There's all sorts of things out there as well. That there's loads of free information out there on the internet, podcast, books, speaking to people, wherever it might be. And as long as you can grasp that and have an appreciation of, and maybe hold your hands up when you don't know something, I think that's a really valuable sort of point to make as well. If you don't know, just hold your hands up and say, look, I'm a bit new to this world. I'm not too familiar with SOAR. Can you help me out? And people are happy to help. You know, as long as you're honest and you don't try sort of, I don't know, sort of budging your way through it. Yeah. I wasn't sure if I could swear there.
Say what you want.
I think as long as you're honest, like I say, you don't try fudging your way through it, you'll be all right. But just proactively go out and learn things, and don't just try and match keywords on a job spec with somebody's CV, because that will just end in tears.
What do you think about HR sifting processes? Because I think a lot of people in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is so wide, varied, there's so many different verticals, so many different specialisms. You know, you might have a skill in one area which, you know, complements the job that you're applying for, but because the HR process don't understand that transferable skill, they don't put you forward for the role. So how do you, you know, to people that you're putting forward for jobs, or, you know, into roles, how do you highlight their transferable skills so that the HR sifting process understand, you know, what they can do for the organization?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. Really good point. I think it's a point that I think has got much better over the last 5-6 years or so. But I think it all comes back to sort of understanding. So particularly when you're looking at maybe roles where you don't need to be in security to get the security analyst job, for instance, and there's a number of transferable skills there. It's about the education from the hiring manager and the business to HR or to internal recruitment or to people like me that we don't need to be, have necessarily someone in security. But I think highlighting those transferable skills is part and parcel of sort of what we've always done. So whether that's bringing that skill out in the CV, making a point of that on the front cover of that in the email, we've just started. I did this year at the beginning of this year. Started using video interviews as submittance for CVs, which is really, really helpful because it does exactly that. So if you're reviewing the CV, you have a video interview next to it, which we can talk through how transferable your skills really are. So that's cool. But I think it's just about bringing it out on the CV, the profile, the front cover sheet, however you're sort of doing it. If you're applying for roles directly yourself as a candidate, I think maybe personalize each CV per job advert. I know it's easier to sit there and one-click apply type thing that a lot of places are set up for now, but maybe if you're full-time looking for a job, it is almost a full-time job in itself. So personalize the CV, cater to that very role you're applying for. That would be a good place to start. But yeah, with regard to what HR and recruitment are looking for, I think it's an educational piece, really.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. You've mentioned so many things there. I'm gonna start.
Sorry, yeah. I started waffling. I thought, stop.
No, it's all great waffle. Talking about CV tips and video CVs and personalising and transferable skills. It's fantastic. I guess just going back before I dive into that, because I'm so keen to rip that open. But before I do, I guess. Let's just finish off about the world of working in recruitment. Right, you mentioned it's a saturated market, it's competitive. That resonates a lot with information security, and I dare say a lot of other industries. Right, that it's a hard game to play when you're looking for. There's almost too much information out there. How do you, as a recruiter, when you're approaching businesses? That, let's say you recruit for a business, you successfully fill some roles, but that's it, done then. That's their strategy done for the next couple of years. How do you move on to the next business and approach them and try and get their business? What's that kind of end of the process look like for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's something that in itself has hugely changed over the years. But I think what it bubbles back to is when you start in recruitment, people talk about relationships and adding value and things like that. And I think that's never, ever been truer than what it is now. So at the moment, you have to be able to add value to organizations, to individuals, to clients, however that might look. And so some examples of doing that would be to heavily invest in what sort of transferable skills could be relevant to a client and help organizations go through that learning curve. It could be putting on webinars for candidates to learn from industry leaders. It could be salaries. So there's a whole host of ways you can do it. But I think so the key takeaway is that the value you add has to be genuine. The second that it's not genuine, or you're doing it because my boss has told me to do it, or because I read a book, it said add value, and you just send them a salary survey or something with no context, and which happens, and I get, and I used to think adding value would be letting people know about the latest breach. This is way back now, but in my head I was thinking, oh, this will be helpful. It's actually not, because you guys probably hear about it before I do in reality. So I think you have to be able to add value, and not just a transactional process of I've got 10 CVs for the 2 roles you're recruiting. What do you think? You have to come with a bit more than that, and a bit more of a consultative version of it. That's where the business comes from. So for instance, if we were building out a team for somebody, we build that team, which is fantastic. But off the back of that, we've probably spoken to maybe, say we introduced 5 CVs, we've probably spoken to 50 people on top of that weren't quite right for whatever reason. Maybe they weren't interested. It was the location and role was wrong and things like that. But those are still connections there that we have the opportunity to add value to, and genuine value as well, not just the sort of, here you go, here's a flyer on salary surveys, or fill your application in here for next time, that sort of stuff.
On the subject of salaries and stuff like that, I guess I think personally InfoSec is probably seen as quite a lucrative industry to work in and break in. It's maybe part of the appeal, and maybe because that, correct me, but maybe that's because of the opportunity for fairly quick progression within the landscape, I guess, can help you bump up that salary journey. Before we get into that side, one of the challenges that I've seen personally, kind of firsthand, and I wonder how you see it from both angles, from the business side and the recruitment side, is actually benchmarking a role for a salary within the marketplace. And even, I guess, as well, a challenge around that is the kind of how you compare London salaries to the rest of the UK and stuff, and how I've never known how a business comes up with the figure, the budget that they have for a particular role, and whether that's a finger in the air as to what they've always done and what they reckon, or whether there's some kind of science behind it. Do you get involved in that conversation and process? And do you ever get, I'm firing questions here, but do you ever get like to the stage where a business comes to you and says, I want this role and this is my budget and it's down here for what they're asking, and actually they need to be up here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a mix of both. Some organizations have set budgets and it's way out of our control. Some organizations come to us and say, look, this is what I'm thinking. I've got X amount of budget this year. I'm thinking of 6 to 10 headcounts. What we're looking at. And we'll break that down and we'll work with them to sort of achieve. So if it's a situation whereby in my opinion, the budget is very low for what they're asking for, what it's then about is either educating on what you could get for that and make some sacrifices on the spec. So for instance, if for argument's sake, if you're looking for a cloud security engineer and you've got maybe a bit under the budget, maybe you've got 60k, for instance, in London, just as for argument's sake, that's maybe a little bit light for a fully fledged cloud security engineer. But what you could get is somebody as a cloud engineer rather, with some solid security credentials coming through. Would you look at that sort of route, or do you want your all bells and whistles? If you do, then maybe we need to rejig a few things elsewhere. So yeah, it's really helpful actually to get involved in the initial phases of when the budgets are defined, because that's often when the spec is defined as well. And that really helps us to be able to not only market map in preparation for that, but work with where all those thoughts have come from, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Do you find organizations over spec their jobs? Their job specifications, because you see them on LinkedIn and people are posting lots of jobs now all the time. But do you think some organizations ask for too much? They might say we want a CISSP with 12 years experience in 10 years experience in AWS, 10 years experience in Azure, Hadoop experience, Kubernetes, this, that, and this, and you think, well, that's totally unrealistic for any one person to do unless you're a superhuman. Yeah. So do you think
I saw a great one on LinkedIn. It was, I don't know whether this is real, but it was like 14 years Kubernetes experience, and it came out in 2014, and it's
Yeah, what do you think about that? The specific you talked about sometimes you get involved in the early stages, and what do you think about the job specs that you see that you haven't been involved in, and you think, wow, you've got in too high on that. You're never going to find someone.
Yeah, so I think that's not I don't want to say an issue because it's a bit negative, but that's a point I think for recognizing. We did a bit of research last year with people that have just moved into cyber, and near enough everyone said one of the challenges getting in was viewing the specs and thinking, I'm nowhere near qualified enough for that. How am I ever going to sort of tick these boxes? But in answer to your question, I think, that does happen. I think the desirable skills and the must-haves are often a little bit merged, perhaps, and maybe a little bit lost there. And I think the way to do it is the education piece. So that comes down to, okay, the spec might look like this, but very often of that spec of 10 requirements, they only really need the top 2 or 3 sort of requirements in there. And it's more, the rest is more around attitude and the more softer skills approach, which is quite refreshing. But you're right. If you read a hard spec on paper and it's asking for 14 years Kubernetes, you go, oh, I haven't quite got that. But if you've got someone, the human bit in between, whether that's the hiring manager themselves, HR, a recruitment partner, someone sort of greasing the wheels to a degree, that's a little bit easier to transfer over. And I often send people the full specs and just say, look, I'll send you the spec. I'll also send you an advert as well. The advert's a little bit more descriptive of what we're actually after. We might have got a little bit carried away on the spec, but yeah, it's a point to sort of just keep in mind, I think.
I guess that's one of the benefits of using a recruitment agent, because you help translate that message, I guess, back from the employee of the candidate to the employer, right? And kind of help broker that conversation without having to interview the candidate, and that they go into interview mode and try and sell themselves. And actually, you can boil it down and say, listen, I know this guy's got X, Y, and Z, whatever, and I reckon it's at least worth a conversation. And I think a lot of the time that's probably what a lot of people need, isn't it? That foot in the door. If you've got an interview, well, over to you now. You go and sell yourself. You've got an hour in front of the hiring manager. You can really sell yourselves, and it's not necessarily all about your CV, but I guess that's one of the benefits. I get you. We're going into the kind of area here of skills and stuff within the UK, and I'm really keen to know like what your view is on. A lot of people tell me we've got a cyber skills shortage in the UK. I hear this bandied around quite often, and there's blog posts on LinkedIn very regularly about this kind of topic. And I never come away reading anything thinking that, yes or no either way. So I guess I'm keen to know what your view is. Do you think we've got a shortage from the academia sector, people breaking into industry, people learning in their bedrooms, what kind of stuff when they're trying to get into industry? Do we have a shortage?
Yeah, I'd be inclined to say yes, but with an explanation around it. So I think from my perspective, it is harder to hire certain skill sets than it is others. Just from speaking from experience, speaking to people who do a similar job in our industry, people I know and things like that, hiring managers, whatever it might be, there's definitely harder skill sets to hire for than there is others. But I think also to add to that as well, I think there's real sort of core work to be done around identification of where those skill sets can come from. It's not like one day there was globally 1 million cybersecurity professionals and there was only 800,000 jobs and everyone was happy because everyone had a job and there was probably too many people for jobs. It's not like that's now flipped to 1.5 million jobs are available, but we've still got the same amount of people because there's always people coming through and joining the industry either from education or other areas. So I think there's, and what we try and do is a lot of work around the transferable skills nature as to people coming into the industry from other areas and help sort of educate on how we can make that journey as easy as possible. Because I think there's a lot of, not misguidance, but there's a lot of, you Google how to get into cybersecurity, you'll see CISSP within 2 clicks.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of sort of work in education to be done there, and there's education schoolings that can happen as well. So I think we need to work as an industry to help identify the skills that are out there that are maybe even in your current organization that are okay. And I think those roles where you don't necessarily need, say, an information security analyst to fill the analyst post, you could maybe take someone from project management or sales or BA or whatever it might be to fill that position, which would then maybe free the security analyst up to take on more senior positions where you need that security experience, is sort of my thoughts. So yeah, I think in summary, they're harder roles to hire for in some areas, but I think there's a lot of work we still can do, and I haven't got all the answers, but I think there's areas we can explore further, and it's just about trying to get it right. To make the industry work,
That's cool.
You mentioned CISSP as well. Like, how important do you think that is as a certification? Like, I know Ashley, you've got experience with this here.
Fantastic.
Don't be like, it's terrible, don't do it, it's a waste of money, and think,
No, not at all. And to be honest, this is more the reflections of businesses and hiring managers, I guess, that I'm sort of relaying on the behalf of. I think CISSP is solid. It, in my view, sort of solidifies the experience you have. And I think if you're in quite a generalist type role, moving towards leadership, perhaps leading teams, there's not a sort of specific avenue you want to explore, like speciality like a penetration testing or common malware engineering, reverse engineering rather.
I don't write it.
I was going to say But so I think there's value for the CISSP to bring there and sort of education experience. Other organisations, maybe the more corporate, regulatory heavy, require certifications at certain levels. So absolutely, there's a need. I'm not going to sit here and bash the CISSP at all, but I think what we get a lot of traffic is from people. I've been in IT for 10 years. I want to go and now be a SOC analyst. I'm training for my CISSP, and I think, okay, that's fine. And it's not going to hurt you in terms of applications or experience, but there's probably more relevant certifications maybe there, or trainings or money to be spent on than maybe a CISSP at this moment in time. 5 years down the line, fill your boots. But I think at this moment in time to break in, the CISSP probably isn't going to be the be all and end all.
That's a fantastic answer, because I've had conversations with people on Twitter and LinkedIn to say, right, the CISSP is a really good certification, and it's the best certification that I've done because of the generalism of the certification. It covers every possible permutation of cybersecurity, but at a high level. It's not going to go into the weeds of a domain. It's going to tell you or teach you what you need to know to be a generalist in an organization, or to be that CISO, or to be the security manager, or to be the CIO, because you need to be business aware and security aware. my CISSP exam, you have stuff, stuff coming up at, what's the correct height to put a light on a data center. That's got nothing to do with, malware or penetration testing. But a generalist needs to know that to go to an organization and say, well, you haven't got lighting here, you haven't got this, you haven't got the right people on the gates. But, you need to have that generalization. I think it's really good advice to say, I think the CISSP sometimes gets a bad rap. You look, I'm, in some of the Discord groups, and some people take a mick out of people that have a CISSP and think, it's the be all and end all of cybersecurity certifications. But I think it gets a bad rap because people want it. It's on every single high, cybersecurity position of power. Every single managerial role I've seen always has minimum CISP, CISM, or some of the SANS courses, or it's always there. So I think it does get a little bit of a bad rap because it's on a lot of CVs. And it's on a lot of job specs as well. But I do like what you're saying there, that there is other avenues. And I do wish more people would discuss that and say, look, if you want a CISP, it's fantastic. But what about OSCP? What about CEH? What about, what's one that you've got, Colin? GIAC. There's absolutely tons of them to do. Don't just focus on what IC Squared are offering, which they are offering some fantastic courses and the community is amazing, but there is other things out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for
it's sort of like you say, horses for courses. It's if you want, a more generalist, high level approach, or maybe you're an engineer at the moment, you're doing security work and you want to validate that further. Brilliant. That could be an ideal option. But yeah, like you're right, for the SME type stuff, then maybe there are other routes out there.
You're selling it to me now, boys. I might have to go and do my CISSP.
I'm telling you, I've got the book. You can have it. It's 1,000 pages. You'll love it.
Right, great. Yeah, a bit of bedtime reading. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. So, James, in terms of, we talked about earlier before I went on my CISSP rant there. We talked about a little bit on the lack of cybersecurity talent, or the perceived lack of cybersecurity talent. But one thing that I've noticed is the divide within the country itself. Now, you have pockets of talent around the UK, and you have areas of just specialism. So you'll have the Cheltenham area, which is heavily technical. You have Manchester, which is heavily technical. Leeds is technical. The Bristol technical as well, and then you have just kind of a wide spread. But do you think there's a true north-south divide within roles at the moment, or is it a little bit mixed? Especially with COVID, there's a lot of remote working, so it doesn't really matter. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, the COVID point you made there has very recently flipped this on its head totally. We're now seeing roles that are open to home working 100% of the time, come to the office for a bit of collab work and things like that. But so that will flip that. But historically, I wouldn't say so. I think the tech tends to follow sort of the big industries. So we've done work right across the UK, Europe, US, and things like that. It just follows the larger industry. So London is obviously hot. We've done a bit of work in the Midlands. We've gone to villages in Skipton in Yorkshire, for instance. We did a bit of work there once. It tends to follow the larger industry, and like you say, when you've got those hubs like Leeds and Manchester, where they've got a few sort of key players there, that only breeds a bit more competition. So yeah, I wouldn't say I haven't seen anyway from my perspective a sort of north-south divide. I don't know if that's what you guys have seen. Or
I think it's an interesting one. I guess as we said with the COVID situation. I guess as a bit of a follow-up question, to answer your question with a question, I wonder whether my perception is, and probably the reality is, that the higher paid roles in InfoSec tend to be in London because of the living standard, the cost of living, all the rest of it. Naturally, you would expect to have a higher salary there. But with that shift then, are businesses... Do you think businesses are, if they're willing to recruit elsewhere around the UK, be a bit more flexible? Do you think the salary... expectations for the role will come down, and will that affect people that are actually living in London who are looking for roles? And if they're going for a role which is open for remote working and it's slightly lower salary, and all of a sudden it impacts on their lifestyle, doesn't it? Not that I'm feeling too sorry for my southern colleagues here, but I guess it's a consideration, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think enormously. I think it. from what we've seen so far, the London salaries haven't changed to what they were too much. Well, if at all, if anything. But what it's done is open the door for people around the rest of the country that maybe aren't on London wages, and they're going, oh, hang on, this is actually a really, really viable option now. Will in maybe a year's time, if this continues like it is and home working remains quite flexible, will that then bring down sort of overall salaries to accommodate for that? Maybe. I could see that happening. It depends, I think, organisation to organisation, how you can stick to home working now versus in a year's time, maybe.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are looking at like a European jobs market all of a sudden. You know, if you're on roughly the same time zone, who cares where you work now? You know.
What do you? So London waiting is something very. I've pondered about a few times, and I listened to another podcast about this, which it wasn't all about London waiting, but they mentioned it was talking about the idea of actually scrapping London waiting completely, because of how it is perceived to be quite unfair. You know, just because you live in London, you get paid more, but you know everything else costs more. It's more expensive anyway. But the introduction of the idea of large city waiting. Because you know, living in Manchester is really expensive. You know, it's not cheap at all. You know, living in Manchester and Leeds and the surrounding areas and in you know, those larger cities is quite high. But you don't get any more salary because you live in Manchester or Chester or Liverpool. There's no bigger salary. But the minute you move to, you know, SW13, wow, you get London waiting. So I mean, you know, what do you think about this idea of large city waiting and removing the London waiting idea?
Yeah, potentially it could work. I think I don't know exact figures in terms of Manchester versus London and how expensive things are there, but I think it could work potentially. But again, London is so expensive, just travel and commuting and all the rest of it tied in. And I don't know, just speaking from experience, the larger cities tend to come with a bigger salary anyway. It might not be officially called city waiting or London waiting, but they tend to sort of come with an uplift anyway. And the organisations that are further out are that much less. To be honest, usually a fair chunk's knocked off due to just transport and commuting in and out. And if we're going forward into a world where that's not going to be as costly, maybe that might sort of throw a circle in and influence it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's going to be a real fun one to watch it play out, and how major organisations, you know, who've invested in massive big tower blocks in Canary Wharf, all of a sudden, what are they going to be doing? You know,
it's
is it going to be a ghost town?
Yeah, it's a strange, semi-worrying, odd thought, isn't it? But yeah, be interesting to see, I think.
Yeah, cool.
So we mentioned COVID, and to be fair with you, I don't think we've mentioned COVID that much on this whole
you're right,
whole series. We've tried to avoid it because we're not the news. How has the current situation affected recruitment? You know, what did you have come March, was it an instant lights off, or has it been slowly trickling and it's picked up again? You know, what's the current trend within recruitment? For someone that might think, actually, you know, I'm really good with people, I'm really good with talking to organizations, my stakeholder management's on point, I want to be in cybersecurity recruitment. You know, what is the state of cybersecurity recruitment at the moment?
Sure, that's a really good question to ask. So I think for us, just from a recruitment standpoint for organisations recruitment, what we've had and what we've found was, so we recruit globally, right? So we do UK, Europe, and then US as well. And what we found was in March, April time, we had a bit of a slowdown. So it was a bit of a, oh, hang on, what's going on? We're not quite sure how this will influence budgets. I think right at the beginning, sporting events were still taking place, and then they were being cancelled. I can't quite remember how it worked, but there was a little bit of a slowdown there. And we have people that look at security operations, engineering, and then also governance, risk and compliance. And that was the case across all sorts of areas. And then what we had from maybe sort of April through to sort of July time was the more critical roles were either still there remaining or sort of coming back. And now what we're seeing is really interesting and quite encouraging for not just us in the industry, but the whole economy, is that over the next sort of 3 months, from what we've heard and what we've seen, things are now picking up again, and people are a bit more aware of how COVID has influenced either their work-life balance or their people in the office or budgets and things like this. So it's really sort of picking up again now, which is so encouraging for us as an economy as a whole. Naturally, industries that have been hit, unfortunately, by the COVID side of things, so the travel and the tourism and things, they've suffered, clearly, but other industries that can work from home, be it tech or whatever, have done okay, and we're now coming out of that. Touch wood, fingers crossed, all the rest of it. So yeah, it's a bit of a brighter sort of end to the year, I think, all things considered.
Yeah.
And yeah, with regard to sort of people getting into cybersecurity recruitment, we've hired a couple of people, in fairness, to come and join the team, who are fantastic. They're working really well, and so it's okay for the minute. For touch wood, and we're, like I said, we've got a few new starters coming through. So yes, it's
yeah. And I see it as well on the kind of candidate side. I've got people within my personal network who, were furloughed, and then what's the phrase they're using? They've been laid off as a result of being furloughed. Like, businesses have realised that, do you know what? They've kind of reassessed their strategy and their investments and stuff, and then they kind of make them COVID redundant. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Okay. Is the term that there seems to be bounced around at the moment. And so there's a lot of people kind of reassessing their own personal lives and thinking, well, do you know what? Maybe this is the break that I need. I've been working in retail or wherever, in the hospitality sector for 10 years. I always fancied breaking into InfoSec, hacking and all that kind of stuff really interests me. And I really want to, I've got some skills, but they're not cybersecurity skills. Like, how can they kind of market themselves to, these entry-level roles that we really want to kind of develop talent in the UK here and fill that skill shortage? What kind of stuff can people call out on their CV? When we mentioned earlier about transferable skills, what would some of them be that's really important then?
So I think where it all starts is finding what sort of thing interests you in security. Like you said earlier, it's such a huge landscape. You can't just get into cybersecurity. You can, but it's not like I'm a cybersecurity professional now and everything about cyber. So I think pick an avenue that really interests you. So I touched on it, but we did a survey last year about why did you get into cyber, and the underlying sort of consistent was the I've always had curiosity or an interest, or I like this sort of world. And whether that's from being a kid at the back of the classroom in IT, breaking into stuff, hacking passwords, whether it's breaking into your mate's hotel room or things like that, or unfortunately if you've been hit by a cyber attack. So there's always an underlying interest there which sort of kicks things off. So from there, I always suggest that what interests you, what do you like about it? You don't just get into this because you've heard the money's good and there's a bit of a skill shortage. Find an interest, because otherwise you won't want to do it every day. And then from there you can work towards a particular goal. So for argument's sake, if you want to get on the route of penetration testing, you've got a bit of IT knowledge, but it's not where it needs to be. Before going anywhere near certifications or training and things like that, why don't you maybe pick up a few resources on the internet or a book around sort of ethical hacking, or maybe play on Try Hack Me or Hack the Box, or connect with similar-minded people on LinkedIn. Twitter's a great source for that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And do a load of research first, and just make sure, because you might do Hack the Box and go, this isn't what I thought it was at all. It's not the ones and the zeros and the matrix. It's nothing like that. I want to go and do something else. So have a route you want to sort of go down. If you want to be a generalist, that's cool as well, but want to be a generalist. So I think that sort of route's good. I think making it apparent on the CV as well. So whilst your CV might not, I'm not a cybersecurity engineer, for instance, you could point it out in your profile that you're on tryhackme.com, you're running there. Here's my Twitter handle, here's some of the work I've done on Stack Overflow, and you can really bring that to light, because that is so valuable. And I don't think that's put on CVs, and even from experienced people, they don't sort of point to their sort of hobbies and tinkering interests, if you like, in the cyber landscape. I think that's really important to do. And then
it's such a good point. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
I remember talking about this on another episode with Ashley about people putting their hobbies on their CV. Like, I don't really care if you read a book and go horse riding and stuff like that. But what you're talking about is like, my hobbies are related to InfoSec. Like, I read this blog, or I've set up my own personal lab, or I do this, or I contribute on Stack Overflow for technical questions and stuff like that. It's amazing, isn't it? Like, contributing back to the community. And what you're saying there is so powerful. If I saw that on someone's CV, I'd genuinely be impressed with them. Even if they've got their own website and they've got a couple of blog posts and they mouth off about, fair play to you. You're putting yourself out there. You know what I mean? And you mentioned as well, about people start and a concept which I really I've first-hand knowledge of with your organisation. You put yourself together with a video introduction, right? And I've watched yours, and I was really impressed with it. So how do people? Are people kind of running with that idea now? Is that something that you're helping them with? How do people? It's a new concept. I think people have got this traditional view of I'm applying for a job, I need a CV and a cover letter and a bit of bullshit behind me, and away I go. But this kind of, it's a bit new, isn't it? Like to have a video platform. And I'm going to waffle for one more minute here, but like, I'll get to my point. Solely for the fact that, again, I refer back to another conversation we had on this series where I think somebody said, do you know what, take the name, take the photo off the CV. I don't want to see any of that. I just want to see the skills, and I can make a kind of a non-biased assessment. I'm not assessing their race, their gender, their age. I'm not inferring anything. I'm just looking at like the skills of the person. But flip side to that, if you see a video of someone, how they speak, how they present, what they look like, you're going to judge them. So you're putting yourself out there a little bit. How do people feel about it?
It's worked. It's had a positive response, not just from. So we sort of approach people for new roles via the video link stuff, similar to what you got there as well. But also, it's the biggest, I think, help and value add to organisations is. We ask questions from the hiring manager to that candidate around what they're specifically looking for, 5-10 minutes, something like that, and include that with the CV as well. So then we get a complete overview of, like you say, how that person comes across, how they articulate themselves, what they're all about. And a lot of the time that can be a huge time saver. So what it saves is maybe if a hiring manager is hiring for 3 different posts, for instance, and they've got from that 3 different roles, you've got, I don't know, anywhere between 10 and 15 sort of interviews all going on, that's 10-15 hours potentially lined up to potentially interview. But if you have 5-10 minutes to review a sort of video plus the CV and get a sort of a snapshot of how they come across, that can be a real sort of difference maker when it comes to sort of the time saving and knowing where you want to go. So yeah, it's had a really positive feedback, in fairness.
Yeah, so I guess you're gonna meet the person anyway, and you're gonna have that FaceTime judgment, and you're kind of bringing that stage of the process forward and making it a bit more of a slicker process. I do like it. I mean, I really see the benefits in it. I think I'd love to see more people do it and just hosting videos, bios of themselves and stuff like that. Kind of put themselves out there.
I do think it's interesting. I think it's just, especially like, what do you say to people that don't have the confidence to do it? To be on camera and sell themselves, because there is a lot of people in information security that are very introverted and they don't want to sell themselves. That isn't probably the worst thing. It's terrible for them. They feel frightened by that. So what do you say to those people that just can't they're nervous in front of the camera, never mind on an interview? How do you get around that barrier?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to make, and it's not for everyone. And the first time we did it as a company, there was 7 of us sitting upstairs or wherever we were at home at the time. Sorry, trying to do this video. We were holding it really close, really far away. The lighting was awful. It was a whole host of things. Anything could have gone wrong would have. But I think and you're right, not everyone's a fan of the video stuff, and we always give the option. We don't have to do this, but it's quite helpful. But I think because we're not sort of looking for a monologue of your background and how wonderful you are and your key areas of experience. It's more of a guided Q&A. It's almost like a mini interview, if you like. And there are always questions from the hiring manager to ask. So they're always role relevant, and we're asking them around their expertise or area of perceived expertise. So it's not a...
So this is not like hi, I'm Colin Hardy and I'm blah, blah, blah. This is more like... Yeah. Each you would do one per application almost.
Exactly, yeah, and it's always personalised.
Oh, okay, I see now.
Yeah. So it's
that's interesting.
So some people do. You're right. Some people do think it's a monologue, and we sort of bring it back, saying, "No, look, here's the questions I'm going to run through. These are sort of the areas we're going to touch upon. Are you comfortable?" And we drill it. And if it goes wrong, we could start it again and things like that. But yeah, it's what I mentioned earlier about that value add. It's taking the sort of the first half of the first interview and doing it there and then, so that we can save everybody a bit of time in the long run. But like you said, Colin, they're going to have to be on video at this stage at some point anyway. So let's get it out of the way with me, who, with respect, doesn't matter too much. And then the end client. Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. I thought it was like a a Paddy McGuinness take me out type of dancing down a
You get your
lift.
mum to give you a bit of a bio. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Love
we
it.
still have the lift,
I'm interested now, Ashley. What would be your theme tune in the lift?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Bit of
that'd
Rocky
be
Balboa.
if I was a hiring manager and someone that came across my desk, I'd be like, Jesus Christ, they've got some fantastic editing skills.
You'd have a look, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So talking about roles, and we very much stuck on recruitment because that's your specialty, and I have no idea about recruitment. So from your area and what you look at, you must see so many different roles. What would you say? What is the most requested cybersecurity or information security role you get at the moment?
Cool, that's a great question. The most requested, I think.
Is it like SOC analyst, information security manager? What do you get a lot of?
We split our sort of niches down, if you like. So I look at more your blue team SOC type area. Colleagues of mine look at more engineering, architecture, cloud, that sort of world, and then we've got somebody who looks after the more governance, risk, and compliance space, so that we're a bit more plugged into our specific areas. But I think overall, recently, there's a few trends coming through. There's a big shift towards awareness-based roles, so awareness and culture. A lot of organisations are investing in those sorts of positions. But also, if I'm totally honest, of recent, since the last 6 months, the SOC blue team orientated roles, whilst it might not be called a SOC analyst, you've also got a big investment in sort of more blue team security analysts with experience in maybe incident response or experience in a bit of scripting skills to help get our scene where it needs to be and things like that. So those are sort of two hot ones at the moment. But to be honest, the whole industry is still demanding people and coming through.
Do you think it's really male orientated? And I'm asking this as a bit of a loaded question, I'll be honest with you.
No, let's go for it.
I recently, I won't name it, but my boss was involved in a panel discussion a little while ago now, and he was talking to me about, and I found fascinating. And it was to do with the language that's used to describe skills within cybersecurity being perceived as very male orientated. You talk about penetration testing, intrusion testing, hacking, hunting, really masculine words. And there was a really interesting discussion, and like these kind of panels often are, there's no real output to it other than just a bit of interesting debate as to whether that language should change. And on the one hand, I think a lot of the room were like, yeah, do you know what, actually, now you say it, those are masculine words, and maybe they don't appeal to a female audience. And then there were females in the audience who said, well, don't dumb it down for us. If it's called pen testing, it's called pen testing. And if it's hacking and intrusion, that's what it's called. So don't play to us because you're offending us even more by kind of changing it. So I think it's... Do you see organisations kind of being conscious of their recruitment tactics to encourage a diverse population, or is it fairly... a bit kind of in the wind?
No, yeah, it's a really good point you make, and that sort of language there used. I think Becky was on your podcast before. She talked about those tools to identify which are more masculine and which aren't, and things. And you wouldn't even think of that until you go, oh, crikey, maybe we are missing a trick here. But organisations are massively conscious about getting diverse, and that's sort of a big push. But again, without patronising or doing it the wrong way. I think there was a book by a lady called Jane Franklin. I don't know if you know her, Insecurity, a few years back. And in there, she spoke about an example where I can't remember if it was a recruiter or an organisation were trying to attract more women into cyber with pink nail polish, which is sort of a horror story of no, don't do that, please. So it's got to be sort of, it has to be sort of a level playing field to a degree. And to take the women in cyber, for instance, it's important to showcase women role models within cybersecurity, but also let's not exclude men from that conversation completely, because it's all about diversity and equality and showcasing that. So it's a really tricky one. Organizations are much more aware of it, absolutely. I think it starts with education, if I'm honest. I think a lot of organizations, we do a local sort of skills fair here where people studying computer science are coming through, where they're talking about cybersecurity and careers, and we try and help them. But a lot of those people studying those courses were girls and females and ladies coming through the ranks, which is really refreshing to see. So I think if we can start with education and then bring people forward from there. That's a really good sort of way to do it. I think, again, going back to that book with Jane Franklin, she talked about the Israeli schooling system has a really good sort of balance, and they really get it right when it comes to women in technology as a whole, not just in cyber. So yeah, I think the education is a real key area to look at.
I think the Israelis got it really sewn up, haven't they? Let's be honest. So yeah, fantastic. That's really insightful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I guess the kind of closing thoughts from me, or closing questions from me, I'm really keen to know then, if I was to kind of nail it down, there's almost two parts to this question, forgive me, but if you're a business, what's the best kind of tip you can give a business for recruiting the best talent? Like, how can they market the role in the best kind of way? And then as a candidate, what are the kind of maybe top 2 or 3 things that a candidate should really bring to the table to help them break into industry and progress?
Sure. So I think if you're an organization, I think the best people we work with, if they're recruiting, they're serious about recruiting and they're going for it. So you're getting CVs, you're reviewing CVs, you're providing feedback, holding interviews, and working with either whether it's a recruitment partner like myself or HR or internal recruitment to get that done. It's almost as if I always sort of think it's, as soon as you start that recruitment process and you engage a candidate, it's almost like you started the clock. And then if you're really quick and momentum's kept going, that's fantastic. If you're not getting the right skills, that can be revisited and conversations can be had about what needs to change and things like that. But I think keep the momentum going in the right direction if you're an organization looking to recruit. Make sure everyone's aware of, if we don't need the whole spec, we don't need the whole spec, and things like that. So really setting expectations and keep momentum going, I think, would be the sort of 2 core points at a high level. If you're a candidate looking to get noticed, I think it will depend role to role, but know what the role is, know what you're going for, know enough about the organization, but try and get some inside perspective as to what they're looking for, whether that's through recruitment or your network or things like that. That will really, really help you in the long run, as to try and find the sort of the 1 or 2 key points on the spec there they're really looking for, that are so important to put forward, and then work with somebody maybe to optimize CVs and applications and cover letters or whatever it might be, or video interviews with what you can do.
That's cool. Well, I like that. I think I know you wanted to close it, Colin, but
go for it. Okay.
It was a question that I meant to ask earlier on, and I don't want to forget, which we often do in these. We forget to ask things, but I think we should be definitely aware that cybersecurity recruitment is a good area to be in. So how do you you've done it. You did a degree in sport, but then you've pivoted to what you do now. And to be honest with you, James, like you all the words and all the lingo and all the acronyms. So if I was just to talk to you, I would think, well, are you like a SOC manager, or do you work in information security? Like you don't strike me as a recruiter. I will be totally honest with you. So how do you get to where you are, which you seem you are so knowledgeable in this area? How do you get into the recruitment side? And then, like you did a bit of CISSP learning and X, Y, and Z. But how do you get that knowledge and gain that knowledge in quick time?
I think, to be honest, my journey, I can't speak for other people or even other organizations to that much extent, but I think my journey and my boss and our culture here has always been, look, we have 3 niche areas for a reason, to go out and research and spend time in those spaces. And that's maybe a lot of time just talking to people and understanding, do your own research. A lot of what I'm saying here is picked up from roles I've worked, or people I've spoken to or met, or just met for a coffee. We do that a lot. It's not always about the hard sell. If you view recruitment as a sales job, and it is to a degree, but if you view it as purely sort of like a car sales, it's not going to work. You have to add value. And the second you think of it more as a sort of broker between 2 parties, add value as a consultant. If your niche is security operations, like for example mine is here, then that needs to come through, and you need to actually add value in that world, and not just try and fire out CVs and blanket mails to everybody, because it just doesn't work. So that's what we say to all the guys here. And it's, if you view it as a career that's not sales, and it is a a broker and it's a consultant and you can add value and it's a career for you, a long run, that will view you better than if you see it as I'm going to get to my desk and I'm going to make 400 calls a day and we're going to go, and someone's going to say yes. So that would be my advice. I think, if you're looking to get into cybersecurity recruitment, I would advise finding maybe a specialist in that space. For example, shameless plug, but what we do, for example, and look to, just become a specialist and don't try and rush into being that specialist. Talk to people, listen. I think that's probably the biggest one. Just listen and soak up as much as you can.
It's really refreshing hearing you talk about this because being in, on LinkedIn, you get sent stuff all the time, and I get sent job specifications or applications or things that it's got nothing to do with my area of specialism. Like, they haven't even looked at my LinkedIn profile, and I think that's the negative stigma that recruitment agencies and recruiters have, because they just fire job. They just do that law of averages.
Automated, surely.
Yeah, super, just automated, just fire as many as possible. So I think what you're saying there is amazing, and I think it's really, really refreshing. So, so maybe look James up. Maybe he'll hire you.
It sounds like you're about to get kicked out of your meeting.
I just saw someone walk in. Sorry.
We'll let you go anyway. Sorry.
Honestly, I think we've covered an awful lot here in a short space of time, James. Thank you for sharing your insights into what it's like to work in recruitment, what it's like to be a business recruiting in this space, and also what it's like and the tips and advice for a candidate. So thank you for sharing your industry insights. We could carry on talking to you all day, I think.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun, and time's flown, and I'm about to get kicked out. So
awesome. Thank you.